We'll go ahead and start. It's a couple minutes after noon. We'll call to order the, where are we? January 22nd, 2020 meeting of the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency Board of Directors. Let's get everyone to please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Chair West?
Yes.
Director Mobley?
Yes.
Director Perello?
Here.
Director Borchard?
Here.
Agenda review, any changes to the agenda? All right, we will at this time.
May I make a request?
Oh, by all means.
How do I? Yes. I will need to recuse myself from one of the items on closed session. Statement is regarding agenda item number 2 of the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Association Board closed session item for January 22nd. The item is in conference with legal counsel, existing litigation involving this case of the City of Oxnard versus Fox Canyon Groundwater Management. Although I was asked by the City of Camarillo Council member Charlotte Craven to fill in for her at the meeting today, I also serve as a council member for the City of Oxnard. I have conferred with my legal counsel, who has advised me to recuse myself from this agenda item. Since the City of Oxnard has filed a lawsuit against the FCGMA in Ventura County Superior Court challenging the FCGMA groundwater allocation ordinance, I have determined that I should recuse myself from this item. This decision was made because the City of Oxnard is a petitioner in this lawsuit, and as an elected official in the City of Oxnard, I may obtain confidential information regarding the subject matter of the lawsuit during this closed session agenda item. I am also recusing myself because I take ethics and public trust issues very seriously. Determined that recusal is the best way in which to serve the public interest in this particular matter. Thank you. And I would like to make a request. Since it's number 2, can we rearrange the closed session agenda so we either hear number 2 at the very beginning or the very end? I have very strong interest as representative of this seat for hearing the complete item number 1 and number 3.
I certainly have no objection to that. We'll take that up with counsel when he arrives. Frankly, the description is such, I'm not sure what number 3 is. So whether it's possible to move them around that way, I don't know, but we'll take that up when Al gets here.
Thank you.
At this point, then, we will recess to close session. The plan is to return to general session at 1:30. All right, thank you very much. The board has returned from closed session. I can advise that no action was taken during closed session that needs to be reported out. In general session, we'll resume the general session that we commenced at noon. And the next item is public comment. This is an opportunity for public comment. Anyone wishing to address the board on matters not on today's agenda, please step forward and feel free to do so.
Good afternoon. Rob Saperstein. I just wanted to ask the board a favor and staff a favor. Future agenda items, if you're going to go into closed session before the open session, if you can do it, put a time certain on the agenda when you're going to reconvene. I know the practice has been 1:30. It was missing from the agenda today. So because it was missing, we weren't certain if there was a different plan. So.
And neither was I certain either until I got here, but
Yeah.
I appreciate that. We'll try to do it. Anyone else? Any board member comments? Any comments by members of the board before we proceed with the rest of the agenda? All right, hearing none, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Unless someone has questions or wishes to pull an item off the consent agenda, the chair will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'd move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, moving on then to item number 6, resolution of appreciation.
Good afternoon, Chair West, members of the board. For the record, I am Kim Loeb, Fox Canyon staff. And so this item is a resolution recognizing the tremendous amount of work that your technical advisory group did over the last several years in terms of helping to develop the groundwater sustainability plans and the sustainable yield estimates. The technical advisory group met for 50 meetings. I was finally worked out to the exact number, but there were 50 meetings. The TAG members gave a tremendous amount of time, their local knowledge, expertise, review, feedback, advice to your GSP consultant, Dudek, to staff, as well as to your board, which helped to provide these much better groundwater sustainability plans, the ones that your board adopted in December as these initial GSPs. I don't know, I can read this resolution, or if the chair or board wants to read it, I don't care, but.
Go right ahead.
Okay.
We posted it so everybody could see it to make your job a little easier.
All right. So the resolution recognizes Steve Bachman, Brian Bondi, Dan Detmer, Terry Foreman, Curtis Hopkins, Sally Liu, and Jim Otusa. And it says, whereas the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency formed the Technical Advisory Group in 2015 following the enactment of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act to assist and advise the agency's consultant, staff, and board of directors in establishing the sustainable yield and developing groundwater sustainability plans for the basins within the jurisdiction of the agency. And whereas TAG members gave freely of their time, experience, and knowledge at the expense of their family and business activities, holding some 50 meetings regarding technical aspects of the groundwater sustainability plans, and whereas the groundwater sustainability plans for the Las Posas Valley Basin, Oxnard Subbasin, and Pleasant Valley Basin were successfully completed and adopted by the agency board of directors at a December 13th, 2019 special meeting, and whereas the TAG has successfully completed its service assisting in developing plans for the future sustainable management of the groundwater basins within the jurisdiction of the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency, therefore be it resolved that the board of directors of the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency take great pleasure in honoring the members of the TAG for their dedicated, loyal, and honorable service. Presented by the FCGMA Board of Directors this 22nd day of January 2020, and then signed by all the board members.
Thank you. Any questions, comments from the public or the board?
I just thought we could ask the TAG members here
was gonna get there.
okay, I'm
We're
sorry.
going to get there. The, I guess my only comment is, and I'm sure I've said this before, I know I haven't said it enough, the GSP that was done, all the work that went into it, particularly not only from the beginning of the TAG process, but from the adoption of the drafts or the presentation of the drafts through the conclusion was so vastly improved by the work of the TAG. There's nothing this board could have done to improve those GSPs without the help of the TAG. Any of the priorities or questions that came from the board doing that process started at TAG. And it was only through their dedication, their consultations, their work, that we were informed enough to be able to discuss with staff and discuss with the consultants the various elements and modifications to the GSP. I can't thank you enough. With that, let me ask those members of the TAG who are present. I see Terry here, Brian's in the back. Any other members of the TAG, please stand up, be recognized. Come on, stand up, come on, get up. All right. With that, the chair will entertain a motion to adopt Resolution 2021-01.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we need this is a roll call, please?
Chair West,
Yes.
Director Bennett, Director Mobley, Director Perrello, Director Borchard.
Yes.
With that, the resolutions are signed, they're available. You'll notice they're signed by all the board members because all the board members share the same sense of gratitude that I expressed. Come on up now and get them, or before you leave, certainly Keely's got them for you. We'd like you to have them. Thank you. All right, moving on next to item number 7. An update on the development of new pumping allocation for the Las Posas Valley Basin. This is going to happen.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, let's see, hopefully that's coming up. So, just a brief background. As you know, the Las Posas Users Group worked for several years on development of a new pumping allocation system for the Las Posas Valley Basin. During that time, the LPUG met regularly with stakeholders and agency staff, leading to a proposed allocation system that was summarized in a July 17 white paper. That was presented to your board, and at that time in the June, or it was 2017 meeting, the LPUG representative said that they had come to an impasse with the then recently formed Las Posas Valley Water Rights Coalition. Your board directed staff to meet with both the representatives of the Water Rights Coalition and the LPUG in an effort to find a compromise and to work forward in developing an ordinance based on the LPUG plan. Based on your board's direction, staff did meet with both representatives of both groups and reported back to your board that there appeared to be fundamental and tractable differences in the approach to the allocation process between the Water Rights Coalition representatives' thoughts and the LPUG plan. One of the big initial stumbling blocks was the LPUG plan identified separate allocation pools in each sub-basin, the east and the west. There was a pool for the Ventura County Waterworks districts and then a pool for the rest of the pumpers. The Water Rights Coalition was adamantly opposed to that at the time. And then shortly thereafter, the Water Rights Coalition, others filed a lawsuit seeking a comprehensive adjudication of the basin. So further development of the ordinance went on hold since the filing of that lawsuit. But at the October meeting last year, just a few months ago, your board directed that staff to move forward with developing new allocation systems and adopting them for all the basins to become effective October 1st of this year, to move off of Ordinance E and away from IAI. Of course, at that meeting, your board also adopted the new allocation plan for the Oxnard and Pleasant Valley basins. So staff anticipates that ultimately the court will adjudicate the water rights in the Las Posas Valley Basin, but it's unknown how long it will take until the court makes its determination, or how that judgment will affect the agency's ability to establish extraction allocations. So in the interim, staff recommends completing development of an interim allocation plan based on the LPUG plan for implementation on October 1st of this year. It should be noted that in a court mandated mediation, that the parties have come to an agreement on the separation of allocation pools between the waterworks districts and the other pumpers, and that resolved a significant issue of contention between the Water Rights Coalition folks with the LPUG plan. So what the main elements of the plan would be that the Las Posas Valley Basin would be divided into the East Las Posas Management Area and the West Las Posas Management Area, and then the Epworth Gravels Management Area, which is a sub-area in the East Las Posas, just as they are in the GSP and as they were identified in the white paper. The allocation in the East and West Las Posas Management Area would be divided into pools for the waterworks districts, and then the other pumpers based on the division, the stipulated agreement, which was similar to but not quite the same as what was in the white paper. There is a reserve allocation set aside out of the non-waterworks district pool for undeveloped lands in the East Las Posas and the West Las Posas identified in the plan. The initial extractions would be by well based on either the greatest pumping either in the 2009 to 2013 period or 2015, whichever is greater. And then we propose having an allocation carryover or carryover unused allocation, ability to transfer allocations, and variances process to be worded consistent with the adopted OPV ordinance. So importantly, the proposed new ordinance would not include allocation reductions or minimum allocations described in the LPUG white paper at this time, and that determination would be reserved for your board to make at a later date if your board should decide to make that decision. So that's the overview on the recommendations to move forward. We recommend that your board receive and file this report and provide direction regarding completing an ordinance for a new interim allocation system in the Las Posas Valley Basin. Based on that direction, we will move forward with completing that ordinance.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board before we ask the public? No, hearing none. Again, any questions or comments from the members of the public with respect to this item?
Good afternoon, board members. Darrell Smith, Brewer. Having not having the opportunity to familiarize myself with the white paper, I have one question, and that is, after 2015, if you've changed crops, does the white paper make allocations for that? For example, if you change from one crop to another that requires more water, is there an opportunity to express that? And I'm only saying so more as a question because I'm not familiar with the white papers in detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Darrell. I think I'll let Kim answer that further, but I think that's part and parcel of what the whole variance process is about. If you recall from the discussion that we had with respect to the OPV ordinance, there's sort of a robust variance process that allows for, people to come in and because of changes in conditions or other circumstance, try to get a revision to those allocations. And that same process is contemplated for the Las Posas Basin as well. So I think the short answer is yes, but there's a process involved.
Members of the board, good afternoon. Andy Waters, LPUG Chair. After reading the staff report, I was a little upset with the way it was put on paper, but after hearing Mr. Loeb's comments, I kind of settled down and bit my tongue a little bit. But he started off by saying that LPUG met for 2 years on the allocation scheme and put in a lot of time and effort to bring your board with what we thought you would like. I know Director Bennett and I met 10 years ago and discussed the plan and what we were lacking 10 years ago. We met for 10 years off and on and got really familiar with the basins and what we needed to do. And that plan was a collaboration of many, many, many hours and give and takes and a lot of time and thought from members of this audience. It said here that we reached an impasse. When we came back to your board with a white paper, I don't believe we reached an impasse. We had legal issues on property water rights that we didn't think it was in our purview to answer. We brought it back to your board for that answer. It also stated here that our plan was fundamentally flawed. That was just a comment that was made in front of your board by one of the members of LPUG. I don't believe that was the consensus that we brought to you. And as a whole, I believe the white paper that we put together was a lot of hard work, and it's a very good body of work that you can consider. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy.
Good afternoon. My name is John Grether. I'm a grower in the Las Posas Valley. As Andy said, the Las Posas Users Group put a lot of time and effort into the white paper, and I concur with his comments completely. I'd like to add some other thoughts, though. The white paper that was developed was approved by all but one member of the Las Posas User Group Steering Committee, and other members included representatives of Ventura County Water Works and Callegas, and they were in support of it. And it was a very comprehensive, very detailed white paper. This board, your board, at the time, all members spoke in favor of that white paper. And so I'm pleased to see that it's being suggested as a foundation for an allocation scheme for the Las Posas. But I would also say that it was a more detailed and nuanced piece of work than the current allocation for the Oxnard Pleasant Valley area. It did cover variances. It also discussed using a water market. It also considered the how to address the unused allocations and how to handle the lands that were not developed. As you may know, in the Las Posas Valley, there is much more citrus and avocados and permanent crops than in the Oxnard Pleasant Valley area. And it was felt by the large consensus that the minimum allocation scheme was very important because so many of the orchards are on a very small amount of irrigation water because they've been very advanced with their technology. So I would encourage you to keep in mind that a lot of this work has already been done, and it would disturb many of us to have to reinvent the wheel and go back and fight over some of these issues like the minimum allocation and the like. So I hope that the staff and the board will keep that in mind as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Good afternoon again. Rob Saperstein for Las Posas Farming Group. Just want to add on both a process and a substance suggestion for the board, adding on to what John Grether and Andy said. from a process standpoint, sort of start at the opportunity and the potential for harm, I'd really encourage the board to direct staff to perhaps take a slightly more interactive, a very interactive approach with the key members of LPUG. If the notion is use the white paper as the model for this allocation ordinance, take advantage of John and Andy and a few others that understand the nuances, and it's critical that if there are pieces missing from the white paper into this allocation ordinance, there is the opportunity to really trigger a lot of frustration that may be unnecessary. And I sort of connect two pieces that may not be obvious to connect. The Las Posas folks that are involved in the litigation have demonstrated their ability to settle some issues. The fact that in 2 or 3 mediation sessions, we were able to deal with the antagonism between the overlying right holders and the Waterworks District is tremendously meaningful. Had we had to litigate that issue, it would have been a month-long trial, having to deal with overdraft, prescriptive rights. All of that was made unnecessary by the workout with the Waterworks District. These folks know how to responsibly manage and compromise to get to the place, and here's sort of the end piece of the process. Deadline's absolutely necessary. Encourage the board to do everything it can to meet that October deadline so that all the pieces dovetail together and come up with an allocation system. But Kim is right. It will be decided in court if it's not worked out by then, by the October timeframe. And so there's a real opportunity. That's really what I'm trying to communicate to you. Have staff work with those folks so that it's done on an interactive basis instead of worked out real time like we did a good deal with the OPV ordinance. We came back serial meeting after meeting. There's a real opportunity to have a couple workshops with the LPUG folks so that you don't have the sausage making all done before this board. And I do think those folks will be able to help staff come up with a good product that the board can live with and may actually resolve some critical issues that are still outstanding in the litigation. So that opportunity is there, and move with it. Really appreciate that. From a substance standpoint, just an example, Andy and John mentioned a few, that minimum allocation piece wasn't mentioned by Kim as one of the potential choices of the way the quantification system would work. It was critical in the LPUG paper that it not just be the 5-year period or 2015 the higher. The additional minimum allocation was absolutely essential to get the dramatic support that the LPUG group had in an allocation system that they wanted this board to act on months ago. Appreciate it.
Good afternoon. Robert Aranio here on behalf of Crestview Mutual Water Company. As a longtime participant in the LPUG process also that went through that for, oh goodness, about 10 years, as Andy said, I can also attest not only that my support of this that's coming before the board and asking for you to approve it, but also as a witness to the hard work that was put in by all the participants that were in that room. And we met on a regular basis, and there was a huge education process for all of us as to how each one of us uses water and what we need to have in that basin and how to actively manage it and make sure it's there for a long time. As an M&I representative, I understand and I support the floor for citrus growers and the importance of it. I saw the numbers myself as to how they were being efficient and how if there were cuts of even 10% in that basin, how could critically impact and negatively impact their operation. So I do believe that a floor does need to be in place. As far as the other participants that were in there, no one was having their arm twisted. There was a lot of heated discussion, and there was a lot of truth that was spoken in there as to us being able to develop this paper over those years. And so to see it come back after 5 or 6 years that this has been languishing, thank you. I appreciate that. I really look forward to it and believe in it and how it was developed and how it covers all the bases. Thank you.
Anyone else? Well, to, I guess, assuage some concerns, at least from my own perspective, I thought the LPUG white paper was an impressive piece of work when I first received it 3 years ago, and that opinion hasn't changed. In terms of direction to staff, my preference would be to ask the staff to work with stakeholders to develop an ordinance along the lines of the LPUG white paper, incorporating the agreement or agreements that have been worked out in the course of the litigation, and reserving for future consideration questions with respect to ramp downs, unless staff is convinced that there's a consensus in the community on that issue. But that's not necessarily an issue that has to be included within the allocation ordinance. And I would like staff to evaluate, I guess, consider further, if it may not have been included in the staff report, but in developing the ordinance and working with stakeholders, consider those minimum allocations and evaluate as well how those minimum allocations would impact, I guess, implementing to sustainable yield. I know there's been a lot of discussion in the general discussion in the past about if you have a minimum allocation and you have cutbacks, how do you manage to sustainability under those circumstances? Take a look at that and let's revisit that to see if that isn't possible. That would be my thought. Anyone else, any other comments? Otherwise, is there a motion to receive and file?
So moved.
Second? All in favor? All right, let's move on then to, I broke my glasses, item number 8. All right, the consultant contract amendment. I thought we were done with those guys, at least for one meeting.
So, yes, this is an item to request a amendment to Dudek's contract to prepare annual reports. As you know, the reports, or the GSPs were completed and adopted by your board at the December 13th meeting. They've subsequently been submitted to DWR, which was no small task. Significant amount of work done by both Dudek and staff to get that submitted. They were the first GSPs submitted to the state, and so far, last I looked this morning, I believe they were the only ones. So that was, like I say, a lot of work to get that up there, but DWR in their emergency regulations require that annual reports be submitted by April 1st of each year following GSP adoption. So that means the first reports are due this April 1st, and because the GSPs for the regulation are through 2015, that means they have to cover 4 years and catch up to the last water year. So they have to cover 4 years of data. And due to that short time frame, staff recommends that Dudek prepare these reports under the existing contract. Some of the information that has to be in there are for each of those years a description and groundwater elevation contour maps for every aquifer for every year for each basin. There's 3 different reports. Hydrographs of each year of the water levels, groundwater extraction data each year, sources and quantities of water supply, including surface water, groundwater, change in groundwater storage maps. This is one of the big lifts. For every year, the change in storage of each aquifer of each basin has to be calculated, and then maps created and graphed, and so and additional work as well. It's actually it's a significant piece of work to put these together. So we asked for a proposal to do this work in this time frame for these 3 basins, and these are the tasks, and the total amount is $135,520. Due to includes 1 meeting for them to come into the March meeting and present the report findings to you at that meeting, and then submit the report to DWR. So that's, their proposal is included in the board package, but that's the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, we recommend you receive and file this report and authorize the executive officer to execute a contract amendment with DUDEC for $135,520 and additional scope. And that brings their total contract amount for the GSP development to almost $2.5 million. And it would increase the contract schedule just a little bit in order to be able to get those reports completed and submitted.
And just to be clear, these are, I guess, an annual report for each of the basins. This is not a revised GSP.
That is correct.
Status report.
That's correct.
Okey-doke. Questions or comments from the board or the public? Any questions or comments from the public on this agenda item?
One quick question. So these will be due annually in April?
That's correct.
And do we expect a similar cost every year?
I don't think the cost will be as much every year. I can't answer that question. In the post-GSP work plan, we talk about moving forward with a new solicitation for the post-GSP work, and we'll get costs on that. But I expect it.
I'd hope it would be less, since this report covers 4 years and next year's report will cover 1. I would hope it would be less.
That would be my hope too.
And all the formatting and everything would be done?
Right.
And I propose that next year and subsequent years that the staff do the annual report to save further money, and United Water can help gather the information, but there shouldn't be any reason why staff can't do those annual reports. Certainly not this one, but subsequent years.
I'm going to make the motion for staff's recommendations here, and I just think that's something for us to decide next year when we see where staff is. But I'm not opposed to looking at that, but I'd like to see what this report is and all of it coming back and stuff. So I'd move the staff's recommended actions here.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Chair West?
Yes.
Director Bennett?
Yes.
Director Mobley?
Yes.
Director Perello?
Yes.
Director Borchard?
Yes.
All right, moving on now to number 9, a post-GSP work plan.
Chair West, members of the board. So as we discussed, the GSPs, these initial GSPs have been adopted, submitted to DWR. They include estimates of sustainable yield based on the best available science during preparation of them. Per Sigma, the GSPs identify projects and management actions to bring the basins into sustainable groundwater management within 20 years. The GSP emergency regulations required that projects included in the GSPs meet specific feasibility criteria, and your board tasked the operations committee with developing a process to vet and select those projects, which they did, and your board approved the ops committee's recommendations and project selection at the August 2018 special meeting for the projects that would be brought into the future sustainable scenarios, modeling scenarios for the GSPs. Throughout that process, your board and staff and DUDEC, as well as the GSPs, have identified the need for additional work following this adoption of the GSPs. In fact, that's called out right in Chapter 1 of the GSPs that additional work's needed, including regional basin studies and groundwater modeling efforts to assess how to maximize the sustainable yield of the basins, feasibility studies for the projects that were included in the GSPs, including implementation costs, and feasibility studies of other projects that could be implemented within the next 20 years. So this, what follows is a discussion of some of the items for consideration and moving forward with post-GSP work. And so we're looking to get your board's direction and feedback on the scope and prioritization moving forward with that work. First are data gaps. And so the GSP identifies data gaps that could be addressed to reduce uncertainty in future GSP updates. Options for addressing data gaps that need to be developed and included estimated costs and prioritization based on cost benefit is needed to be done moving forward. The model peer reviews include quantification of uncertainty and sensitivity of specific parameters in the models that provide a lot of information to prioritize where to get the most bang for the buck in addressing those areas of uncertainty. And the monitoring network chapters of the GSPs identify spatial and temporal data gaps as well. New monitoring facilities are needed to address spatial gaps. Fortunately, through the DWR Technical Services Support Program, we did get 2 nested monitoring well clusters installed, one in the Oxnard Basin and one in the PV Basin, as you know. But there are many other areas where we need additional monitoring facilities, so working to prioritize those and develop costs is the next step moving forward. Then, in terms of temporal data gaps, one of the challenges we have is most of our monitoring network are pumping agricultural wells, irrigation wells that are monitored quarterly. Some of the dedicated monitoring wells that United and Cayugas have, they have pressure transducers in there and data loggers. This is something that we think is we should move forward with in our look into for our key wells to install pressure transducers and data loggers. That way we can be sure that we are measured water levels is actually a static water level. It's not a recovering water level from time was pumping. And so that's a fairly straightforward process to fix those data gaps. Basin optimization studies. Well, there's a lot of discussion about this. A lot of the work that United has done in the Oxnard and Pleasant Valley basins in some of their sort of what-if scenarios. We need to move forward with looking at this on a big picture basis on all the basins, on how can the basins be optimized in their management over the next 20 years to minimize the amount of pumping reductions that might be needed. Now, that requires groundwater modeling. And of course, for the GSPs, we did contract with United and Cayugas for that modeling. Also, some projects or some optimization scenarios would require implementation of projects such as rearrangement of pumping, moving pumping horizontally or vertically to different aquifers. To do so would likely require projects to bring water into areas where we're trying to discourage pumping, and so it needs to be looked at all together, and then the feasibility of those projects looked at. And as I mentioned, some agencies, United in particular, are moving forward with some optimization studies on their own. We should definitely coordinate with whatever agencies are doing this and leverage that work, but on the basin-wide basis. Project feasibility analyses. Projects, of course, I think everybody recognizes are key to increasing the sustainable yield of the basins or reducing the demand to minimize the amount of pumping reductions that will be needed to achieve sustainable management down the road. There were a number of conceptual projects that were discussed during the GSP development, but they weren't far enough along or sufficiently well enough defined to be included in the GSPs. And so we need to look at those, which ones have promise, and then move forward with doing feasibility analyses to understand the benefits and the costs of those. And then larger projects, of course, will likely require multi-agency sponsorship and or development, so that will have to fall out and be an item of discussion moving forward. Replenishment fees. The resolution that your board adopted to adopt the GSPs included a finding that enables the agency for the first time to collect fees and participate in water supply, replenishment, and infrastructure projects. And so stakeholders have, they expressed a desire to have an advisory oversight committee to make recommendations to the board regarding collection and expenditure of replenishment fees. It should be noted that replenishment fees under SGMA must be adopted in accordance with Proposition 218, which places procedural requirements on adoption of the fees and limits them to the amount required to fund specific or specified projects. And additionally, the California Supreme Court recently ruled that replenishment fees are also subject to Prop 26, which further limits the agency's ability to impose fees without obtaining voter approval. So in order to comply with these limits, the agency will need to prepare a detailed report on the project costs and benefits before a replenishment fee can be adopted. The GSPs have monitoring program plans in the monitoring sections. They include semi-annual water quality monitoring. As you are probably aware, the agency relies on other agencies for water level and water quality monitoring, including the Ventura County Watershed Protection District, United Water Conservation District, and Cayugas Municipal Water District, among others. Most of those agencies do more frequent water quality monitoring. However, Watershed Protection District only collects annually water quality samples, so the agency needs to enter into an agreement with the Watershed Protection District to do additional monitoring to be compliant with the GSP monitoring schedule, which is compliant with the regulations, including reimbursing them for the cost for the additional work. Staff will bring this as an item to your board, probably to the next meeting, but a future meeting for discussion. Groundwater models. So as we just talked about, agency relied on United and Cayugas for the numerical groundwater modeling for the GSPs. This was expeditious and cost-effective during the GSP development, but it does present challenges. It's cumbersome. In some ways, we had to enter into agreements, and it presents those challenges. Some members of your board over the time of preparation of the GSPs expressed a desire for the agency to maintain its own model or models, and doing so has a lot of advantages, but would require significant investment. So that's something that we recommend your board plan to consider as we move forward. How do we address modeling in the long term over in GSP implementation? Staff has talked to your board periodically about the need to develop a new data management system for the new Sigma compliant pumping allocation systems that have been adopted now in 2 basins and will be moving forward with in the other basins. The new system needs to be GIS based in order to transition to a land-based system that was requested at least by the OPV stakeholders and as part of that new ordinance. We now are far enough along in development of those new allocation systems that they're sufficiently well defined that we can now move forward with exploring options for implementation of a new data management system. So we plan to do so in the coming months. And then come back to your board for inform you and decisions on how to proceed. Advisory committee. So the tax work for the GSP development has now been completed. Staff recommends your board appoint a new committee to provide advice regarding the basin optimization studies, projects, replenishment fee moving forward. Staff recommends that committee be multidisciplinary and include representatives from the ag, M&I, and environmental sectors. Since this new committee would be advising on projects and on fee collection and implementation and specific projects, we recommend that they be subject to a conflict of interest code and the Form 700 Statement of Economic Interest filing. And staff suggests that your board task the executive committee with evaluating and making recommendations for the composition of the committee, whether it's one committee or multiple committees, and then we'll come back to your board for decision and moving forward with appointing a new committee. Consultant selection. So DUDEX approved scope of work for the GSP, and now these first annual reports is winding up. The agency is always represented that once we get past adoption of those initial GSPs, moving to the next phase, there will be a new consultant solicitation for qualified consultants. Of course, DUDEC would be open to that, responding to that solicitation as well, to assist in developing this post-GSP work plan based on your board's direction, conducting basin optimization studies, evaluating project feasibility, and preparing the future annual reports and other work that may need to be done. All these things have significant short and long-term financial implications. The cost, of course, is going to be dependent upon the scope of work and the schedule of implementation. Staff can begin preparing some order of magnitude cost estimates based on your board's direction of the scope of the post-GSP work plan. Some of the costs, though, may require services of a selected post-GSP technical consultant, depending on the item. So that was kind of a broad brush of all the elements that we think that the agency needs to start looking forward to moving forward with. We are requesting that your board provide some feedback on these items, the scope and timing, prioritization as your initial thoughts on them so that we can move forward with refining this and starting to put some cost to things moving forward.
We talked a lot during the GSP preparation and adoption process about how that was just the beginning. The road ahead looks kind of challenging, but I appreciate you laying out some of these elements because it really does sort of at least help categorize a lot of the tasks ahead. Any questions or comments from the board before we open it up? Yeah.
Just a question for staff. I see all these broken down into these various categories, and I tried to listen closely. It seems to me one of the things that's really important is we have to have these allocation plans in place, by next fall. Which of these, I'd like you to try to clearly identify which of these things. There's not a category that says allocation plan implementation in here. And I'd like to break it down in that way. Like, is the new data management system essential for the allocation plan implementation? If it is, that moves up just because some of these things, obviously, some things are going to they won't have the same priority. But I think I would assume we're all in agreement. We want to try to meet this deadline, and we want to meet it with appropriate decisions and tools and data and all of that to do that. So can you help me with that?
I'll take it first pass that. I would say it in reverse. The new data management systems depend upon the allocation plans. So we need to get the allocation plans done forthwith in order, October 2nd 's the deadline we've set for getting that done. So just to reverse that.
So the data management system comes after we come up with the allocation plan. Are any of these things in here essential to coming up with the allocation plan? That's my question. Anything in this work plan here?
These are all constellations of work that have to be done, the way that they've been presented thematically and not at the level of detail that Board Member Mobley got to, or let's get to the annual plan and do it ourselves. That's down in the weeds. We're giving you thematically what we think needs to be done and then ask you thematically. But on that data management system, my own opinion is that needs to be done forthwith. We've outlived the usefulness of the old one. It was basically constructed around the Rube Goldberg collection of rules and one-offs and exceptions and variances that we've created over 35 years, and it's outlived its usefulness. The new data management system needs to be able to acquire the advanced metering system stuff coming in, needs to be able to prepare semi-annual extraction statements with the minimum of the human touch to be, and it needs to be, and it will generate the data that your board needs to make decisions with.
So in your opinion, we need that operational by the time we get to the implementation of the allocation plan?
Yes, sir.
Right. And is there anything else that is essential for the implementation? For example, we can do basin optimization studies, but those won't necessarily be done or finished as, those are going to be ongoing. So is there anything else?
Yeah, so I'll read the rest.
Right. Yeah.
Sure. Thanks, Jeff. So, yes, Director Bennett, the basin optimization studies and the project development, that's going to take some time. Those are going to inform basically our target, where we need to be in 20 years. So your board has been taking this stepwise bites and getting there. The allocation systems to get off of IAI and move forward with fixed allocation. We don't need those done to get there by the October 1st deadline that your board set. But in terms of when you start looking at what is the ramp down going to need to be and what are the targets at the end of the road, that's when much of this other work will inform what ultimately were the sustainable yield of the basin.
I completely agree. All of this is essential, and it's all going to need to be done. I'm just trying to make sure I'm just trying to focus on. So I'm hearing that we've got to get after this data management plan if we're going to be implementing new allocations. We've got to get this data management plan. What else, or are there other things that you just go absolutely, basin optimization studies don't have to be finished or anything, but is there anything else? I see Mr. Pratt.
So just to demonstrate the sort of difficulty to answer that question, my own opinion is that your board has suggested that we needed to get to replenishment fees forthwith, because right now your only tool is supply on the supply side, limiting pumping reduction. So, but the difficulty, to answer your question, all this work needs to start to proceed forthwith. On the case replenishment fees, my own opinion is, based upon the way your board has typically approached this problem, there'll be committees set up, there'll be, and based upon discussions with the user, the stakeholder community, in the input they want, there's going to be a lot of work done to structure that. It's 2 years out before I think your board will have some sort of a consensus opinion to act on. And so we need to start that work immediately, just so we can be here within a couple of years to give you a recommendation coming from. So does that?
I agree. It's just just a different question.
Okay.
So, no question. I mean, I'm not saying some of these things don't have to start now. But I'm saying what absolutely, if for some reason the committee hadn't started yet on replenishment fees, I'm not saying that that's what we should do. We could still do the allocation implementation, and that's part of why we have a slow ramp down. We have sort of this grace period at the beginning. We have that so that we can get these things done. But I don't think we could do that without data management. So that's what I'm at. So I'm not trying to minimize any of these things in terms of urgency. I'm really just trying to focus on that priority first, and then figure out what the other priorities are of the board members as we go forward.
So Director Bennett,
Yeah.
no, none of those other tasks, allocations are not dependent on those other tasks moving forward by October.
Okay. And then do we have the resources and do we have the work plan for allocations in place for October 2nd?
We are working on that for the Oxnard and Pleasant Valley, and we will be working for that on the Las Posas Valley. As we talked about here, we got direction from your board on how to proceed with that. So I think we'll be on track there. We do need to reach out to the pumpers in the GMA portion of the Santa Rosa Valley. We've not engaged them on that. So I think we're on track to do that. Do I think that there might be a transition time as we get to October and we move to the new allocations? Well, we're still getting a new data management system up to speed. Yes, I think that's possible. Do I think that's doable? Yes, I do think that's doable.
So you think you have a work plan and the resources right now to come up with the allocation plans for Oxnard and LPUG for October 2nd?
Well, your board adopted the allocation plan October, I think it was, for Oxnard and Pleasant Valley. And yes, I think that we're on track to move forward with the plans we discussed here for Las Posas.
Thanks.
Yeah, so we don't have a formal work plan. Internally, staff's discussed this at length. There's going to be a lot of stakeholder input involved. Your board has directed more of that today during the comments on the LPUG. So informally, I think we can get there, but we're going to have to focus. That is a key element on those items. Board Member West alluded to some of the difficulties. We'll come to you stepwise, so we'll ignore the ramp down for the moment. We don't need that immediately, but we will need it soon afterwards. So we'll be beginning those discussions. There's the unexercised rights question. I think that was still open. But yeah, we've got an informal work plan designed to get us there. But we wanted to make sure it was consistent with your board's vision for where things are going.
Well, I'll end my questions with agreeing with Director West. When we used to say this is just the beginning, it really is just the beginning. There's a ton of work ahead for this to be good government for everybody when we're done with it. So thank you.
Any other questions from the board before we open it up? Hearing none, any questions or comments from the general public with respect to this presentation?
President West and members of the board. My name is Bob Seemack. I'm with United Water. And in the spirit of local and regional collaboration and in line with achieving water sustainability, United and the Association of Water Agencies, AWA, are facilitating two separate but complementary events in the upcoming months. And I'd like to just give you a preview of those events, and it's in line with many of the elements that are in the work plan, and are very complimentary of that. The first one is the Water Sustainability Summit, which will be hosted by United Water, and that date is February 28th at our new headquarters, and it will include both state and regional water and political leadership. I might add in the planning committee for that summit includes actually several members of the water community that are in this room, including Glenn Shepard with the GMA. The second event, and following the Water Summit, is the AWA Annual Symposium, which is April 16th, and I'm have the honor of being on that planning committee. And we've established the theme for that conference, and it's communication to collaboration, getting to yes. And it's an attempt to get a regional solution, not only the Oxnard Basin, but Ventura County solution for water sustainability. And we've confirmed that Nancy Vogel, who is director of the effort that the governor has on the water sustainability, or not, actually I should say the water resiliency portfolio, that which was released, the draft was released a couple of weeks ago, will be a featured speaker at that conference. So, and finally, Ken mentioned it, United is facilitating an effort, and we call it the Regional Optimization Plan, which is really where the first two items are events. This is a process where we'd like to further define the projects and programs that will get us to that sustainable level, meeting the shortfall on the Oxnard Plain and others. And we're in the process of forming a steering committee. In fact, some of the process is to use the summit and the symposium to gather interest in a regional solution and form that steering committee to guide this effort. The end result of all this will be partnerships that will put together projects and programs that will increase the yield or optimize the basin management, not only in Oxnard, PV, but really the county, because we have some valuable resources that if we can get together, we can utilize and achieve sustainability for the region. So wanted to, I guess that was more of an infomercial than, but we're working very hard. And I think I agree with President West. We're in, and Director Bennett, we're in a very critical period of water development in the county, and this is a time where we have to really act. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Rob Saperstein again, sorry, the talking heads here. Few different scattered thoughts. The data and in the rubric of optimization of the sustainability plan, there were significant comments from a wide group of folks submitted to the GMA on the sustainability plans. And those were submitted really in an effort to make sure that the plans, OPV, LPUG plans, were done technically well, technically sound, use the best available data. And also those comments included a lot of suggestions about improvement. And I would hope that those comments could be mined for what future revisions in the sustainability plans might look like. It goes to almost every aspect of the pieces that staff has identified of what needs to be done. And this board's acknowledged, staff's acknowledged, all of your stakeholders acknowledged. This will be a feedback loop. Those plans will be perpetually improved. The data that they're relied upon will be improved. But you've got a gold mine out there. Take some time to go through that stuff, but it ought to kickstart a lot of the thinking about how to better optimize, and from a data gathering standpoint, modeling, all of those pieces have been commented on probably ad nauseum, but they were done not to be critical of the plan, but to give the GMA staff tools to improve the plans. As to the baby steps into a new allocation system, this is partly a comment and partly a question. The construct for the OPV plan and what was presented as the concept for the Las Posas plan is still a well-based system. So my assumption was the current GMA database could accommodate adjustments to a well-based reporting system because that's what it currently does. I understand that database needs to be shifted when there's a shift to a land-based system, but that's not happening in October. That's to be determined based on the tools that GMA staff develops in whether it's modified current database, future database, whatever that is. But for that database maybe being, as Jeff described, pieced together based on 30 years of slowly modifying software, so it's not optimal, it can accommodate a well-based system to be implemented shifting on October 1st, October 2nd of this year. So question, comment, I think that. Don't even think you could handle it? No, wow. So there's a different sort of urgency in getting it improved by October if all those other pieces are going to get fed into it. But it is based currently on a well-based system, and they shifted from the old historic allocation to the T allocation, 2015-ish. I can't speak for staff, but my assumption was that could be modified, not perfect by any means, but by October 1st to accommodate the approved OPV plan and the soon-to-be approved LPUG plan. Last piece, sort of a couple different components. You've got tremendous resources in the community from knowledge about what other column water masters do in more heavily managed basins, folks that on a day-to-day basis deal with Main San Gabriel Basin, Orange County Basin, Chino Basin. That's where this GMA, whomever it is that's ultimately managing these basin resources, have got to move themselves to. This is a monstrous work plan. I understand it'll be over some period of time. Your budget will not accommodate what's going to be required to implement Sigma from the standpoint of DWR's expectations. So you've got a budgeting challenge, a staffing challenge, resource challenge, but you do have folks in the community that have experience dealing with all of those other more heavily managed basins. So opportunity for you. You've got folks in the community and some members of the board that have gone through the headache of Prop 26, Prop 218 compliance. Don't forget you've got those resources to rely on. Director Perello has been through those wars more than once on Prop 218. Resources out there. And last piece of that puzzle is then what do those advisory committee or committees look like? I would encourage you to think broadly about maybe more than one committee that is focused on those specific tasks, depending on what the appetite is for serial accomplishment of some of those goals rather than stepping through one at a time, because you've got the resources out there. I'm not sure what all that looks like, but having a Brown Act committee that's got to report consistent with FPPC requirements, all that stuff, that's a heavy burden on participation when maybe you could establish some more nimble, specifically oriented, task-oriented committees, given all of what you've got to tackle. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Anyone else? To start with, I want to commend staff for bringing the work plan to the board at this point. The ink is barely dry on the GSPs we adopted this month, and obviously there's a lot of work to do, and I appreciate the fact that you're jumping on it to start the process and include the board and the community immediately. Just a couple of comments on some of these things. We've talked about the data management system and it's, I know that's been a work in progress and a concern for years. Inevitably, the further we get down the road with AMI, the more imperative that new data management system is. You know, with the system to date is a manual one. And that's just not consistent with the AMI process or the automated process we hope to develop. So that's a piece that, irrespective of the allocation system, that's something that's needed whether the allocation system changes or not. Beyond that, one of the reasons I like the idea of recommending the advisory committee discussions first to the executive committee for coming back here. I agree with Rob. I sort of like I'm not sure one committee fits all the basins and all the different projects or processes that they have to cover. I too am interested in hearing different ideas for what those committees look like, where the members come from, and how they function. And that's something we'll take up and invite public comment on at the executive committee as we consider that. Because I think that's absolutely instrumental to moving this process along, particularly with respect to projects. You know, before we start considering replenishment fees, before we start worrying about Prop 26 and 218, we first have to define what we plan to do, how we plan to do it, who benefits, and then, of course, how it gets paid for. Replenishment, you know, the fact that the GSPs authorize the agency to essentially get in the replenishment fee business is, once again, that's the beginning. You know, that's really just that's an invitation. It's not a trigger, and we're going to have to do a lot of work with respect to projects before we can go down the road of even considering replenishment fees. So in terms of prioritizing some of these, frankly, whether we call it basin optimization, whether we call it project feasibility, at the end of the day, whether we're talking about the first review in 5 years or where we wind up in 20 years, that's what's going to be, those items are going to be the salvation of the basin. Those items are going to get us to sustainability, both the sustainability of the basin as well as sustainability of the economy more than anything else. And so, personally, if there was a priority for me, you know, it would be moving down the road on basin optimization, you know, and projects. They take a long time to develop. They take a longer time to build and implement. The sooner we start on that process, the better. This is my thoughts. Anyone else? Yeah.
Mr. Saperstein mentioned the fair political practices. If we do set up committees, I would recommend that we do follow the rules of fair political practices. We don't need to be challenged in court later on that somebody had a conflict of interest. The recommendations that the committee could possibly make, somebody who wants to mothball or gum up the works could challenge it in court, and we would have a problem. I think this staff's recommendation on this page 3 of 4 of item 9, bottom paragraph, is excellent recommendation. I'd wholeheartedly support it.
I have a couple of things.
Go ahead.
So, so Kim, on there was not really a proposal, but an option to have the staff build a groundwater flow model, and it's like, I don't understand why you'd want to spend that money to develop a model when we already have Cayugas and United Water. Those are done. They're extremely costly, take an incredible amount of time. Why would we want to spend the money to develop those? So I think that's totally off the table. Just drop it, in my opinion. And then as far as the advisory committee, I mean, there's a lot of technical things that still have to be worked out. Basin optimization studies, projects. So I think at least one of the committees is going to have to be technically based, whether you, well, basically whether you bring back the tag or change some players, but definitely one of the committees needs to be, have those skill sets. And then, I would say break it up into agriculture, maybe M&I, and break it up into different basins also, so everyone kind of has their own area of concentration. But definitely, I think multiple committees is the way to go as far as advisory committees. That's it.
Excuse me. Thank you. We've got a big challenge in front of us. We're all acknowledging that. And it's a challenge where we're going to need a lot of community support. You've got Prop 218 votes, and you need to have buy-in on lots of aspects of this. And I want to suggest that politically, when you're dealing in the political world, when you have a challenging issue and people make jokes about it, so what did they do? They created a committee. Right? You hear the joke made all the time. No, they created a committee. They created another committee. And at the same time, I think we're all sitting there saying we need committees, right? Because we need this community support and this buy-in. But I think that we should be cautious, and there should be a cautionary reminder that creating a committee is not a solution to the problem. And that oftentimes, after committees get formed, you have people saying, wow, we wish we would have thought of that as we were creating that committee. So in the short run, the easiest thing to do politically is to create a committee. You get short-term political gain. You created the committee, everybody feels good, they get to be on this committee, that, et cetera. We've kind of handed a lot of the problem to somebody else, et cetera. I want to make sure that we don't just look at, get that short-term gain and not be thoughtful as we do this. And so I'm not on the executive committee, so I appreciate this opportunity to get this said. A couple of things. Again, I'm not opposed to the committees at all. I'm saying we have to buy them, but we have to really be thoughtful about it. And a few concepts about the committees. The committee should be very specifically tasked. We had this whole issue of, is this committee going to be doing policy or are they going to be doing this? And, if we're not clear at the beginning, then the committee spends a lot of time fighting amongst themselves about what their task is. We need to be, crystal clear. This is the border. This is what you're doing. This is not what you're doing, so that they don't waste their time, staff doesn't waste their time, and then fights don't come back to us going, this committee's having this problem. Across the board, I'm not saying just in the world of water, everywhere that's a problem. So really specific task and a specific time frame. Committees shouldn't have a feeling that they're permanently the committee, and that's not healthy for them in that this board is made up, has elections and various times, and you don't want to create committees. You want to have committees that come to an end, and then you reevaluate. Peter Foy, completely different than me on the spectrum on the Board of Supervisors, but we completely agreed. These committees have to stop and be reevaluated. So make sure at the beginning we don't, because it hurts people's feelings when you say, we're going to stop and evaluate your committee. And they go, what, are we doing something wrong? And you go, no, we set that up at the beginning, all right? We're going to stop and evaluate those committees. That and a number of other things that could go on, but I just would encourage the executive committee to be thoughtful and sort of educate themselves about all of those kinds of things that could make this move. And so we look back on this time and we go, the board did a good job in terms of how they structured and set up these committees, as they move forward. As I have other thoughts, I'll try to share them. But those will be the questions I'll ask as it comes back to us in terms of the committee side of it and stuff. And if I could, there's a couple other things in the work plan that I want to comment on. Probably one of the bigger disagreements, I'm going to guess, will be out there as to whether we should do our own modeling or whether we should rely on other people to do their do the modeling. So staff has referenced the fact that it has been brought up that at least some board members have expressed there is an inherent conflict of interest in having in using somebody else's model. And we saw that. People started saying, well, but did they create that model for their benefit or, how, and then we have to have a consultant check and all of that. So I think there are some benefits, as staff pointed out, some significant benefits, but there is a cost to that. But one of the things that we need to have everybody start to both be aware of and help us educate the public on is this is going to be expensive. You don't manage something as precious as the fresh groundwater in Ventura County under the Oxnard Plain and the Las Posas and Santa Rosa in this time in Southern California without it costing some money. And expensive is probably the wrong word, but it's going to take resources to do this right. But if we set up the right committees, we commit the right resources, we have the best chance of creating something that everybody feels good about in the long run. Because if we commit the right resources, we don't get challenged environmentally by groups in court, et cetera. And we actually come up with projects that mean we don't have to make those hard cuts. And that's going to be the win. But I would offer probably the only way we get that is to make investments early, right? Investments in our capacity to make good decisions, then make the good decisions, and then reap the benefits and have lower cost in the long run in terms of that. That's the vision that I have and that I hope we could embrace as we try to pull this work plan together. Thank you.
Yeah, along those lines, I've often heard it said that in California, we don't have a water shortage problem. We have a water value problem. And I guess our values are going to be tested as we develop the policy to affect the future of groundwater use in this county. So, any other questions or comments? David, did you have something?
I have a few, and I appreciate the other board members' thoughtful comments, and it made me think of a few. I want to kind of go back to the concept of projects, and I think Director Bennett said it well. Well-placed projects or well-done projects perhaps make the job of this agency a lot easier. If we solve the supply problem, we kind of solve a lot of the hurt and a lot of the legal wrangling that we see now. To me, that means a couple of things. The first and foremost in my mind is we have an agency like United in our midst that is tasked, it's kind of their job, to build projects and to solve the seawater intrusion problem. And we've heard before in months past of United's got a couple of ideas on the table, and that's a potential source of a project that really we don't have to manage. United has the ability to manage and make that happen. And if we are cooperative and are a partner in that, we actually probably get the most bang for our buck there. Secondly, replenishment fees are the way that we get other types of projects done because they're going to cost money. And so I think Mr. Pratt pointed out a very important point for us to be able to collect replenishment fees. We're going to have a lot of work to do in terms of lining up the Prop 218 process. I hope it doesn't take 2 years, but because we've heard even from a lot of the farmers in our midst that they're very interested in getting that started right away. Because again, they want to move beyond this process of reduction of pumping and move towards the idea of solving the problem. And to me, that means, again, increasing supply. And then in terms of looking at the work plan, again, regarding projects, it almost seems that part of that project feasibility analysis is first going back to some of the comments we saw in the GSPs, indicating data gaps and discrepancies or things that maybe didn't tie in, or perhaps things that we need to review about our assumptions on sustainable or yields and whatnot. And those data gaps, and then that kind of informs our basin optimization work, where that needs to happen. Once we kind of figure out the information we're missing, that might inform how we do a better job of directing the pumping in different areas of the basin so that we're not exacerbating the problem. Maybe I didn't give very clear direction on any of this, but it seems to me that those are my opinions anyway at this point.
I did have one other thing I wanted to share as we're all thinking about committees and creating them. The creation of the, staff can help me, the Upper Santa Clara, outside of Piru, they created a groundwater sustainability group, and I forget the name of that, but we're familiar with that, right? So they,
Fillmore Pyro.
yeah, Fillmore, yeah, there we go. I lost the name. But the controversy spilled over into the Board of Supervisors room because the board has a representative on that. And there were a few people on the committee that sort of wanted to set up that committee, and they were adamant to not have any environmental representative on the committee. And when it came to the boardroom, about half of the pumpers went, that was the dumbest thing that you could possibly do, set up this committee without an environmental representative on it. You just want to invite us to get sued? Why not put an environmental representative on it? And all of a sudden, what was viewed as heresy was then suddenly viewed as appropriate. And I'm not saying just environmentalists, but as we're thinking of the makeup of the committee, we need to remember more and more this groundwater basin, this water equation that we have is a growing concern of the whole population. And the whole population needs to buy in, particularly if we're doing Prop 218 votes and those kinds of things, which sometimes may be more expansive than we think, depending on if cities or agencies, does everybody in the agency have to vote? If it's, I don't know those answers, but I do know overall, again, to get to that happy spot that we are all looking for, being sensitive about that as we go forward is another appropriate thing. Thank you.
I have one more comment on the advisory committee. I would recommend that the committees be totally independent and not staff-driven. Let the committees vote their own chair people, and staff can certainly be there to offer support, but not be the driving force, not be the chairperson. And I think it's so important to get our stakeholders involved in helping flesh all this information out that I think it's better mindset for them if they're totally independent and they know that it's their job. It's not staff telling them what to do. I mean, staff is going to tell them what the charge is, what information we need, but let the committee be independent and work on its own as far as coming up with what their ultimate development of whatever the task is. So independent, I think, is definitely important.
I'd add a cautionary voice to that. I mean, that on the surface, I think that sounds very good, but I think these are our committees created by us that we need certain product from. And we can't have a committee just go, we're not going to give you that product. We're going to whatever. And so who's the chair of the committee that's not, in my mind, significant, but I don't think I would be comfortable with us sending the committees off saying, you're completely independent. Staff's there if you need them. They're going to tell you what you have to get done and then go off. And I think we have to have staff giving input to the committee. These committees are going to have strong people on them, and I'm not worried about them. But I've seen committees literally ball up the whole works because they decided they wanted to do something different or whatever, and that's where staff has to at least be clear and be clear with us about that. So I have a slightly different take on how much independence is good to an extent, but I would want to be cautious and not have staff have it. I think that was a fundamental question that we had with some that came up with us. Whose committee is it? It's the Fox Canyon Groundwater created committee. And so we ultimately have to keep the control over that, and we do that through our staff's interaction, right? And so that's a slightly different thought. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Coming from a city where there are committees and there are, can give you examples of what Supervisor Bennett is talking about, I do think the committee has to be underneath this board, with all respect to everybody on this board. And I'll give an example. Along with creating the committee, one of these other items is this groundwater modeling. And I'll just read directly out of the page, item 9, page 3 of 4, with the groundwater modeling. The agency relies on UWCD and CMWD for numerical groundwater flow modeling. This was expeditious and cost-effective in preparing the GSPs, but presented challenges including the need to enter into restrictive agreements with each of these agencies to conduct modeling for the agency. Now, I assume agency means us. A disconnect from the modeler and the agency's consultant and technical staff, and the ability to obtain complete and timely technical documentation on the modeling. Board members recognize the itemization, and some stated their desire for the agency to have and maintain their own model. Staff recommends your board plan to consider the best approach to address groundwater modeling. I understand it's extremely expensive, but if we have committees and the committees start to ask questions about the data, how accurate or is the data skewed, that is something that a committee can come up easily and come up with, and if they are, shall we say, decide to go rogue, you can have a real problem. I do appreciate having an independent committee, but I was trying to bring that in line, especially if the committee is going to start using data, that there's a question about data. No disrespect to the agency, the models, but it has to be independent because as I see it, this agency doesn't work for either United or Callegas. It's over the county, and I wanted to add that. Thank you.
So you've heard a few comments. I think the direction is full speed ahead, but beyond that, I guess I should ask, is there anything more particular you need beyond what you've heard from the members of the board already?
Chair West, I think this is a good feedback to start. This is something that we're going to have to, we'll be working with for some time and be refining, and so we'll start focusing and taking a deeper dive into each of these to be able to get focused the questions and issues for more specific direction as we move on. So I think this is what we need to do.
Can I ask, as we're wrapping this, do you think you've heard the message from this board that getting the data, the new data management system up to speed quickly is important to this board? And I'm asking that of the board also, because I think that is yeah.
So Director Bennett, I heard two very specific things. I heard that moving forward with the data management system is very important to move forward with. Well, actually, I heard three things. I think that that floated to the top. Moving forward with mindfully defining the committees and their scope should go to the executive committee to work out and come back to this board, and then we need to move forward with optimization and project feasibility and starting to put our arms around moving forward with those. Now, that and the committee thing and probably moving forward with a consultant are all going to be interrelated, but those are the main priorities I heard coming from your board, if I got that correctly.
One other thought, if I may, and please don't consider this direction, just a suggestion at this point, is that this is a challenging itinerary. it might be helpful to take, and not to create a traveling roadshow, but for each of these items at an appropriate time, plan community workshops to introduce the subject, to the community at large and get feedback or input from the subject, or at least make them aware that this is the work is ongoing and invite, create a mechanism by which they can participate. We've talked a lot about data gaps. Rob is correct. There are a lot of letters that were sent and comments that were sent during the GSP process with respect to data gaps, but I'm not so sure if we took a poll of the folks in the audience, or particularly the folks who are affected but don't often show up, if they'd be able to tell us what the data gaps are and what those data gaps mean to them, and how they should be part of the process to help fill them. And that might be something, and that's just one example. And I think for each of these items, we should consider how to get the public more involved as we try to tackle each of these issues. Again, with that then, no further comments. We will move on to item number 10, because the meeting hasn't gone on long enough. Let's talk about budget performance.
All right, Chair West, members of the board, we saved this for last because we thought the work to do would start to frame where we need to be thinking as we move forward. We typically do bring a second quarter or mid-year budget to actuals to budget report, which compares the fiscal year 1920 second quarter actual revenues and expenditures and also as well as the projected year-end amounts to the adopted budget. The year-end expenditures are projected to be higher than budgeted. Specifically, year-end balances are significantly less for the designated GEMS fund, the operating fund, and the total fund balance. And we'll walk through each of those briefly. So the special counsel and other legal expenses related to Las Posas Valley Basin adjudication being charged to the designated GEMS litigation reserve fund per your board's direction. The special counsel expenditures have been significantly greater than what was budgeted ahead of the beginning of this fiscal year. The current total budget for Nosman is approved budget is 1.2 million and 150 million or thousand for Benton Ore. And they result in a projected year-end GEMS balance of this approved work of 192,000. However, at the current rate of expenditure, that approved amount is not going to carry us through and will likely be exhausted by 2020. And the expenditures will likely increase during trial, which is presently scheduled to begin in April 2020.
When you say 2020, you mean by February of 2020, we will
Next month.
we will be out of resources for the legal.
Director Bennett, to clarify, the approved scopes of work will leave us with 192,000, but that approved scope of work, especially for Nosman, is going to be pretty well exhausted, I believe, by next month, and they'll be coming to us with a contract amendment request. So in the operating account, it's presently projected to have a year-end deficit of 451,480. That's slightly different than what was shown in your board letter. We did not include the 65,000 in local costs for the DWR installed monitoring wells. So that was overlooked in the board letter, and so the actual amount of the projected deficit is 451,000. That assumed that your board would approve the 135,000 for the annual reports, which you did. The reason that for that deficit was the unbudgeted expense for the GSP annual reports and the monitoring well installation, as well as less revenue than in the adopted budget. So one thing we didn't account for in the adopted budget and the sustainability fee increase that your board implemented retroactive to the beginning of the fiscal year is that the pumping fees, including the sustainability fee, are collected 6 months in arrears. So the fees that were collected in the first half of the fiscal year were for the last half of the past fiscal year. And so this third quarter now in the fiscal year, we'll just now be collecting the pumping fees, including the sustainability fee, for the July or August, depending on the sector, through the end of the year. So this will be the first that we see the increased fee. I'm seeing puzzled faces, so I didn't explain that well, and I think that's how we overlooked it when we were putting the budget together. But suffice it to say that we collect the pumpings reported and the fees collected 6 months past, or we're getting the past 6 months. And so any fee increase that's implemented, it's not realized in the budget revenue for another 6 months. I probably made the explanation more complicated than it really is, but that's where we're at. So looking at the projected year-end balances in each of the funds, and this is just the table in the report that's been collapsed and then updated with the operating fund. You can see here was the adopted budget. We got the GEMS fund here, the surcharges fund, the designated reserve fund, the operating fund, and the total balances there. So this was the adopted budget with a projected about $2.8 million balance based on the actuals in the first half of the year. This is where we're at, and the projection to the end of the year with currently approved scopes of work. This is where we're looking at. Here you can see the GEMS fund down to the 192. The surcharges fund is starting to build up. It's actually projected to be a little higher than we originally budgeted because we did receive a large payment of past due surcharges that had remained to be collected. And then there is the projected year-end operating fund deficit. Any questions on that? So this just kind of discusses what we just talked about. Significant additional special counsel expenses have been incurred and expected to be more to be incurred. In the unbudgeted GSP expenses of the annual reports and the local match for the monitoring wells, as well as that delay in the receipt of the groundwater sustainability fees. Obviously, we're looking at significant expenses moving forward in the post-GSP work plan. Project implementation will be likely funded through replenishment fees into the future, but there's a lot of planning work that still needs to be done that would be funded through the groundwater sustainability fees. Do want to point out that staff did apply for $854,600 in SGMA or SGMP planning grant funds for the eligible expenses for developing the GSPs. We're hopeful that we would receive those funds, but we're not going to know until DWR announces the grant awards in March of this year. And those funds were represented as earmarked for the post-GSP work plan. That's how we discussed them in our grant support solicitations. So we got a lot of grant support letters in from various folks within the agency jurisdiction. We're pleased with that. So we're hopeful we get those funds. So we're back to considering possible groundwater sustainability fee increases. So this table, just to refresh your memory, the groundwater extraction fees, that's our GMA fee. It's $6. That is set. Sustainability fee, your board made up that to $11 effective the start of this fiscal year. We'll just be seeing those increased fee revenues coming in the next month or two. And then in moving into the fiscal year of 2021, your board rolled that up to 14 for a total extraction fee of 20, which would bring us up to about $2.5 million total annual revenue. But again, we won't see those increased fees until the beginning of next year, the calendar year, in early 2021, or the third quarter of the next fiscal year. And then just for discussion, there are some various other fee amounts and projections of what kind of revenue they would bring in for your board's discussion. And that pretty much concludes our presentation of where we're looking at in our current spending, the year-end projection, and then depending on what we want to implement in the post-GSP work plan and how fast we want to implement it, as well as the anticipated increase in special counsel expenses. Likely we're going to need some more funding, but we don't have the projection of what that is yet at this time.
I've got a question.
Yeah, I do, but go ahead.
Just one, just maybe to kick it off, and that is that because of this 6 months in arrears collection issue, if we run into a problem, big, huge legal fees, other issues, I know we've got some reserves, et cetera, but we certainly decreased our reserves significantly with the $3 million that we sent to United. So do we have anything else fast to be able to recover or to help us if we're in a pinch? How is it, just our reserves, and if they're gone, if we implemented a fee increase, we'd have to wait 6 months for that to start to have any impact?
Depending on where you implemented it, when you implement it, but generally, yes, it would be 6 months.
Okay.
And this is the only reserve that we have.
Right. If you could leave that up, I appreciate that. It'll help me later.
Have any projections been made yet? And I think I know the answer, but with respect to annual GSP implementation costs and legal fees beyond what, I know there was some GSP implementation costs assumed in next year's budget, but has a more granular analysis been done, or a different analysis been done with a different number yet?
Chair West, we do not have a more granular analysis at this point. The feedback from your board at this meeting was going to feed into that, and the next step is to start preparing those analyses.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the board at this time? Any questions or comments from ladies and gentlemen of the public?
Jeanette Lombardo, California Food and Agribusiness Advocates. Again, I am up here asking you to be fiscally responsible. We just spent $2.5 million on a plan we originally expected to spend $1 million for. We have modeling done that you want to do over again. This money is real money, and this is coming out of the users of the water, the farmers in this county. There is ways to trim this, and I sincerely ask that the executive committees work together, the operating committees, to review these budgets and find ways to control this more. It just keeps blowing up. Every meeting, more money. It's got to stop because it's not sustainable. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Robert Aranio. The interesting idea or thought that I have about this is that if you were to move some money, say from the surcharge fund, in order to cover your shortage that you have projected up here, that'd be done as a loan. Please do not take one-time monies to fund a recurring expense or ongoing operations. I understand there's cash flow issues. I get that. But please set it up as a loan where the money will go back into the surcharge fund and can actually buy the replacement water that's necessary and not use it to cover the shortages on a long-term basis. Thank you.
Anyone else? Kim, my suggestion would be that you, I guess if, I don't know if there's one scheduled, but I guess convene a meeting of the finance committee so that they can consider the budget as a whole as well as finance options going forward, to have that committee bring a recommendation back to the board. I know at this time there's no proposal yet with respect to any of these items. They're really just for illustration purposes at this point, but rather than defer it until there's a crisis, maybe we should get ahead of it if we can.
I have a little bit of concern with that in that we all have to own this one. And I'm just a little bit concerned about the finance, about it being in the finance committee. Is that right?
I think it is. Is that right? Is that,
Who is the finance
anybody
committee?
know? Is,
I didn't.
I think it.
That's right.
Okay.
That's not-
Sorry.
So anyway, so I just think we've whatever information, like you say, if they convene and they come up with some, and you get, I'm going to say I need all the information that you got at the finance committee. So I think we ought to all get all the information. That's my own sense. We have to have a special meeting on this. We have a special meeting on this. One, two, I think it's just really clear. We got unknown legal cost ahead of us. We've got certainly significant and unknown work plan cost ahead of us in terms of that. And we have, for better or for worse, transferred a significant amount of potential reserves that could be used either as a loan or something to protect us. We transferred those to United, and so we don't have the cushion that's out there. My own sense is bring it to the whole board and let's all figure out where we go. That's my.
Oh, I certainly have no objection to that. I think you're right. A special meeting on that might be appropriate because I could see that taking a considerable amount of time. So, I have a question.
So Kim, is this the first time that we've applied for a grant or for the GSP development funds?
So Director Mobley, not exactly. We were in the first round. It was actually the county on behalf of Fox Canyon applied for and received $250,000 for preparing the GSPs. The way that first round, there was not that much funding available. Then the round two, we were pretty far into development, and they were not allowing us to look backward in terms of reimbursement too far, and we were close to wrapping up. So, and because we had that first round, affected our eligibility to go after those funds. Those are the funds that a lot of the GSAs got significant funding from. This round three, which I think is going to be the last round of the planning grant funds, they did allow a significantly more backward reimbursement or ability to apply for funds in arrears, and so that's why we've done that. And so round one, yes, we received 250,000, and then round two, the timing wasn't right for us, and this one we have applied for and are cautiously optimistic we'll be successful.
So round three is more of a matching fund or grant, like matching, versus a straight 100% grant. It's reimbursing what we've already spent.
Yes, that would have been, the 800-something thousand is the amount that would be state funded. We have a match already, it produced the match in terms of the work that we've done. So that would be the net.
Yeah, okay.
If I could, I'd just like to point, the GEMS fund has dropped dramatically. The designated surcharge fund dropped, dramatically. Our designated reserves were holding right at $1 million, and we're at an operating budget deficit of $450,000. I think Mr. Aranio is absolutely right. You don't fund ongoing expenses with one-time revenues. So we want to make sure we're not doing that. We have to cover the operating costs. But I think we have to view these work plan projects almost as ongoing expenses because they'll just roll from one to another. So they have to be viewed that way, and they have to be funded with an ongoing revenue source for us to go forward. So I know it's always difficult to talk about fee increases. It's politically not easy, but it's probably one of the most essential parts of good government is when we need to make a good investment, and I think this is the time for us to genuinely be ready to make a good investment here. We need to be after this and think this through. I'd like to make sure that this chart in particular is one of the, this chart wasn't included and would have been a nice thing to have included in our write-up today for this. It would have been helpful to see this. I know you described these things, but it would have been helpful to have this specific chart the way you had it here. So I'd like to make sure that that comes back. And I'd also like to suggest you talk to, you work with the chair, but this idea of when we do this, depending on how complicated it is, that might determine whether we need to have a special meeting. May not need to have a special meeting. I don't know how much more information there is. It's more noodling in terms of there's options out there. If we do this kind of work plan, that kind of work plan, et cetera. But breaking it into two parts is when I think elected officials are going to be, a body like this will make a better decision, which is one, present the information, let anybody want to poke at it, right? But don't make a decision. Then at the next time, come back and actually make the decision. Seems to be, unless we can get the information out really well beforehand. But just a thought, I'll completely leave it to staff and the chair to work out. But this is one we definitely want to get right, as if there isn't anything in here we don't want to get right, but this one we certainly need to. Thank you.
Chair, one more addition to that. A two-part process makes a lot of sense. It's kind of what we've done in the past and correct, I think, for this body. But it seems to me for staff to be able to present anything meaningful, they're going to really have to kind of think about, at least for a year, what's the work plan costs looking like and project those out. And that's going to take a little bit of effort. So I think we need that kind of detail before we can even make this is kind of on a gross scale, and I understand the concern, but we need more detail than just what's presented on this chart.
I think you've gotten direction enough, have you not?
Yes, I have, Chair.
Thank you, all right. Last item is an executive officer's report. Is there a motion to receive and file the executive officer's report?
So moved.
A second? All in favor? With that, we're adjourned. Thank you.